It's still technically morning, so this is still the morning drip. Apologies for those who wanted to tune in and see something more early. I sat down this morning and I'm like, you know what? We've covered a lot this week because a lot of the things that I feel like I would give you a strong opinion, we've got through, right? But here's what I'm going to talk about today, and we're going to keep this relatively short so that I can get this up in a somewhat timely fashion. We're going to learn a lot this week when it comes to Michigan hosting Washington. A lot of those things that we say, hey, that was good, or maybe that needs to be worked on. Not that there was much of that from this last week. We're going to learn everything we need to know about, maybe not everything. We're going to learn a lot about what we need to know about this year's Michigan team going up against Washington this week. Now, unfortunately, Washington not exactly keeping its end of the bargain. We know that. Losing to Montana, it's inexcusable for the Huskies to lose that game. But still, this is a tough defense, and this offense has pieces. So as long as the defense can look relatively similar as to what it was this past week, which they're going up against some guys still. Dylan Morris is a better quarterback than what he showed. Obviously, you got Giles Jackson out there. Michigan fans are well accustomed to knowing what he's capable of doing, but very thin at the wide receiver in the wide receiver line. Obviously, the offensive line is very good for Washington. But so if the defense can at least hold Washington, I'd say to 21 or under, then I think that's a big win. Obviously, you'd like to hold them even lower based off the fact that they only scored 7. But they're going to get a much better showing, I feel, from the Huskies than what we saw. But obviously, I think the bigger thing comes on the other side of the ball. Can the offense continue to do some of those really good things we saw last week? It's going to be a challenge to replace Ronnie Bell's production. But I think that's the one room that you feel good about when it comes to what Michigan is putting out there, in the sense of if you lose one major piece, you've still got your 2 outside guys in Cornelius Johnson, Dalen Baldwin, who we find out yesterday was injured through most of fall camp, and if Ronnie hadn't gotten hurt, wouldn't have played at all last week, according to Josh Gaddis. But you've got those guys. I'm really excited to see AJ Henning. We need to see Roman Wilson take a big step forward. We've still got Mike Sainristil, who obviously hasn't had that big breakout game as a receiver, but does a lot of things. We saw some really good blocks and special teams plays by Mike Sainristil this last week. And then on top of that, you've got the freshmen. Do we start to see Andrell Anthony and Christian Dixon get some time? We saw Andrell this last week. We didn't see Christian yet, to my knowledge. So there are a lot of different guys that I want to see. How do those receivers do? But even more importantly, especially because Washington's talking about it, can they stop the run? Will Washington stop the run? Or will Michigan impose its will and say, we are going to run the football regardless? Really, really impressed with Michigan's offensive line. They were as advertised. But again, that's Western Michigan. Like I told you, be happy about the Western Michigan game. I'm not saying hold on to that like a crux that you use for the rest of the season and say, but we have that Western Michigan game, right? This game is going to tell us a lot more. It's not going to tell us everything, right? Because there's certainly, say Washington would have beaten Montana. I had the feeling that this game could have very well been one of those Notre Dame games, right? Where you feel like you know what's going on, right? You think back to 2013, Michigan beat Notre Dame, and it was like, maybe the national championship is within reach, only to find out the next week against Akron, maybe not. So it's this will at least tell us a little bit about, can Michigan continue to do the things that they did a week ago? If it can, then you feel like you should be able to get through the next couple weeks. Obviously, NIU, that should be even more of an automatic win than Western was, given that they had a win last week, so against Georgia Tech, so you never know. But that should be a win for Michigan. And then Rutgers certainly looked improved. We'll know more about Rutgers going up against Syracuse, but you have your eyes a little bit on that Wisconsin game if you can get past this. As the fans, remember what we say has no bearing on what the players think, what the players do. But we in the media or you as fans can look at we can start looking at that Wisconsin game as really being the game that's going to tell us what Michigan is capable of. And but we're gonna start getting answers truly this week. I do think I picked Michigan to win preseason going into this game. Obviously, there's no reason to change that. But I do think it is a little bit more of a challenge based off the fact that Washington did lose. I know it's counterintuitive, but I think that if Washington would have gone out and had a similar game to what Michigan did, I would have felt a little bit better. I know that sounds, again, counterintuitive, but you're going to get Washington's best. They're going to be hungry for a win. So we're going to see also just as importantly as anything, Michigan's resolve, that killer instinct, like you've seen if you've been watching X's and O's or listening to the Locked On Wolverines podcast when Jake Butts appeared, that killer instinct that Michigan had when Jake was on the team that we haven't necessarily seen since. So it'll be interesting to see all around. If Michigan can go out there and look dominant, particularly in any of the three facets, that will prove a lot as to what's going to be going forward. But the good news is if they can at least get the win, even if it doesn't look dominant, even if they only run for 120 something yards like Montana did last week. Granted, it's Montana, but if they only run for 120 yards, the passing game is still really low. The defense continues like a bend don't break type thing and ends up being like a 17-14 win or something like that. At least you have some weeks to work on some things before you get to that Wisconsin game, assuming that you can get through NIU and Rutgers. So anyway, that's going to do it for the afternoon drip, I guess, today, because it's basically afternoon. By the time this renders, it'll probably be up at like 2 p.m. So that's how long it takes. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Sorry for the delay. We'll talk to you soon.